At my own husband's estate dinner, they told me, "Sit down and be quiet. You're just the widow." Smiling calmly, I rose and left without a word. Their laughter echoed behind me. By sunrise, their accounts were frozen, their homes secured, and their arrogance crushed. Because what they failed to realize was simple. I wasn't just the widow, I was the owner. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica, the storyteller on the Family Tales channel. Here, I'll share stories about love, conflicts, betrayal, and infidelity within American families. These stories offer a deep look into relationships and the challenges families face. Stay tuned and explore with me. If you love emotional stories and want to uncover the hidden secrets in families, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our videos. At my own husband's estate dinner, I was told to sit down and be quiet, dismissed as just the widow, as if I hadn't painstakingly built every aspect of this family from the ground up. I rose with a smile and exited in silence. As the door clicked shut, their laughter echoed in the air. As dawn broke, their accounts lay frozen, their homes secured, and all they believed belonged to them was now legally mine. And I was just getting started. Before we dive in, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you won't miss any exciting stories like this one. We'd also love to hear where you're tuning in from, so drop a comment below. Thank you. Eleanor Whitmore here. At 68, it seems my family has reduced me to just being the widow. I pressed my blouse twice before heading out, applied my lipstick 3 times, and reminded myself to hold back any tears, no matter what. Excuse me, it was merely a dinner, only my family. The individuals I have cherished and nurtured for more than 40 years. We gathered at my son Blake's stunning glass house, the one he and Candace purchased after Henry and I co-signed the loan. No one seems to bring that up these days. They mentioned we were coming together to discuss estate matters, which I took to mean the house, the lake property, and the retirement accounts. Everything Henry and I created from scratch, fueled by canned soup for lunch and foregoing vacations for 2 decades. I brought a blueberry pie, as Henry always claimed it was my finest creation, hoping it might lighten the atmosphere. As I entered the room, not a single person glanced my way. Blake was already pouring wine with the flair of a seasoned host at a Napa Valley tasting, while Candace, in her gold heels and sparkling artificial smile, was strutting around the kitchen as if she owned the entire space. Jack, their eldest, offered me a nod, one of those gestures you exchange with someone you faintly recall from a funeral. The atmosphere was tinged with a subtle tension, infused with a hint of perfume and the unmistakable scent of something charred in the oven. 9 of us gathered around the table I gifted them last Christmas. Blake began with, "We've been considering that simplifying things is the best approach." And I immediately understood the implication. More focus on them, less on me. When I inquired softly and thoughtfully, "Have you had a chance to discuss the trust with the lawyer?" Candace remained completely absorbed in her phone, not even glancing up. She simply whispered, "You're just the widow, Eleanor. It might be best to hold off on speaking for the moment." Silence enveloped the room. Blake let out a chuckle, and Trevor, my other son, joined in as if they were sharing a classic sitcom moment. My hands trembled beneath the table, not from weakness, but because the gravity of that moment crashed down on me like a second death. This time, it was me who found myself buried. I examined each of them individually, their eyes dull and unfocused, as if I were merely a stand-in, not a human being. I placed my fork aside, rose to my feet, and remained silent. I refused to grant them the pleasure of my tears or any grand speeches. The pie sat on the counter, pristine and untouched. I approached my car, secured the door, and for the first time in 43 years, I embraced the silence within as a sense of peace rather than loneliness. They didn't even bother to call after me, completely unaware of what I was on the verge of doing. That night was a sleepless one. Not a single minute of rest came my way. I found myself in Henry's worn brown recliner, cocooned in the very throw blanket that sparked our playful debates on chilly evenings. It bore frayed edges and a subtle coffee stain, one he never seemed to see. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and I found myself replaying their words in my mind endlessly. "You're simply the widow. Perhaps it's best to remain silent," as if I were merely a background character in the story of my own family. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, I rose from my seat, unable to endure the silence any longer, and made my way barefoot across the hall to the cabinet we always kept off limits to the boys. We referred to it as the no-go drawer, a hidden space for passports, titles, old wills, tax documents, and other items best kept under wraps. As I pulled it open, a chill ran through my cold hands. Uncertain of what I sought, perhaps it was a reassurance that I still belonged to this family, that Henry hadn't abandoned me entirely vulnerable. I set aside the well-known documents, insurance papers, birth certificates, a nostalgic photo of us in Colorado, and that's when it caught my eye. A sturdy white envelope tucked away at the back, marked in Henry's handwriting with a single word: Eleanor. I gazed at it as if it could vanish at any moment. Henry was not one to pen sentimental notes. He expressed his affection by ensuring the tires were rotated and the gutters remained clear, rather than through written words. With trembling hands, I slowly opened it, revealing a single sheet of notebook paper, accompanied by a neatly stacked pile of clipped documents behind it. The message read, "If you're seeing this, it means something has already gone awry. I had intended to share this with you earlier, but I realized that if I did, you would focus on fixing the situation rather than prioritizing your own well-being. The lads, they're not terrible, but they do have a selfish streak. And what about Candace? Her situation has deteriorated. The moment I fell ill, I could see it unfolding before my eyes. I've implemented a few updates. All of it is under your name. Property, finances, the lakeside estate. You possess complete authority and power of attorney. They have no idea. There's no need to feel guilty about using it. Refuse to be silenced by their attempts to shame you. And if they ever attempt to seize what belongs to you, unleash your fury and watch it all go up in flames." I remained still, the gravity of the situation enveloping me. I was completely unaware that he had taken this action. We had discussed the will in generalities, but I assumed he was merely exercising caution. I reviewed the documents, authorized, officially notarized, officially endorsed by our attorney Alan. All agreements are fully legal and binding. At that moment, the terms presented were ones I struggled to grasp fully. Immediate implementation of financial control clauses, ownership restructuring, and asset transfer upon death. Everything was present. 8 months prior, Henry had meticulously rewritten everything. He left us during a period when I believed we were simply attending doctor's appointments and experimenting with new treatments. He executed his plan discreetly with complete understanding, likely prompted by Blake's curious glances at his business records and Candace's peculiar, cheerful inquiries about future actions. It felt as if Henry's voice was echoing in my mind, urging me to remain cutting edge. It's time to recognize and embrace my true strength. I brewed a cup of tea to occupy my hands, even though it went untouched. I walked back and forth in the kitchen, retrieved the documents once more, and carefully verified the signature dates. It was genuine, everything. As I continued to gaze at it, I sensed a profound change unfolding within me. The sensation of invisibility, as if I were merely a bystander in another's story, transformed into something entirely different: mastery. At 3:47 a.m., I reached for the landline and dialed Alan Kramer, our lawyer for more than 3 decades, the one who would discreetly pass Henry fishing magazines during our meetings and persistently referred to me as Mrs. Whitmore. despite my requests to drop it. After 4 rings, he picked up, sounding groggy but quickly becoming alert when I mentioned my name. I made the most of my time. Henry entrusted everything to me. The paperwork has been located. I'm ready to activate it today. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before inquiring if anyone else was aware. I informed him that the answer was no, not at this moment. Excellent, he remarked. Keep it under wraps. I'll arrive by 9, bringing all the essentials you require. I ended the call and remained in the hallway, gazing at the vintage wedding photo on the wall, capturing us on the courthouse steps, young, apprehensive, yet perfectly in harmony. I caressed the frame and murmured, "I've got it now. Put your worries to rest." Then I settled back into my seat, carefully folded the documents into a pristine manila folder, and tucked it into my purse as if it were a powerful tool. It was precisely that, and if they believed I would remain silent while they dissected my life, they were about to discover precisely what kind of woman they had underestimated. When Alan rang the doorbell at 8:57 a.m., I was fully prepared, dressed, makeup flawless, hair pinned back just the way Henry preferred. The dining table was a battlefield of documents, and my notebook was brimming with questions scrawled in the margins from my restless pacing the night before. He entered the room, briefcase in hand, along with that familiar weathered leather folder he had been toting around since his sons were in elementary school. Upon catching sight of the envelope Henry had left for me, his expression transformed, transitioning from a place of professional concern to a realm of somber respect. We dedicated 2 hours meticulously examining each clause, every legal term, and all trigger points. By 11:15, I had completed the signing of 6 documents, effectively transferring control of all assets, properties, accounts, and business interests registered in my name. Alan reached out to the estate manager, providing clear verbal confirmation that all instructions should now be directed solely to me, no longer to Blake, Trevor, or even the trust, just me. Hearing him articulate it was nothing short of surreal. All subsequent authorization is exclusively in the hands of Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. I believe I held my breath for an entire minute. He turned to me and inquired, "Would you prefer they discover it through their accounts, or should we arrange a meeting?" I paused for a moment, then said to him, "Let them experience it. Let it strike like a collision." He flashed a smile. "Excellent. That's the Eleanor I recall." And just like that, it was complete. The remainder of my afternoon was consumed by calls to Henry's brokerage manager, the property firm, the title company, and the accountant, each one affirming that my name was now the sole name of significance. At 3:15 p.m., I received a message from Blake. "Hi there, quick question for you. Do you happen to know why the cabin account is locked?" I chose not to respond. Just 5 minutes later, Candace made the call. I decided to send it straight to voicemail. Her tone was a blend of sharpness and sweetness, just as it always is when she believes she's on the verge of coaxing something from you. At 4:30, the group chat buzzed with a flurry of messages regarding unforeseen account problems. Trevor, who seldom speaks up, finally reached out with a question. Did someone alter the access on Mom's end? At that moment, I realized the panic had begun. They were still oblivious to my actions, but the tremor had struck and the aftershocks were on their way. I arrived precisely at 5:05, fully aware that everyone would be gathered at Blake's for yet another strategy dinner. With a folder in hand, I strolled up the stone path and knocked on the door, presenting myself as if I was simply delivering a casserole. Blake made his entrance. It was a mix of confusion and irritation, with a forced smile struggling to stay in place. I entered the room, placed the folder on the counter, and said, "You all might want to take a seat." They did not. Naturally, they did not. Candace stood confidently by the counter, arms crossed, while Trevor lingered in the hallway, hesitating as if he might retreat. With a deliberate motion, I opened the folder, arranged the documents neatly, and declared, "This is the new estate plan. All of it is registered in my name. All things. Silence enveloped the scene. Not the surprised type, but the conceited type. The type that believes it can outwit you. Blake let out a dismissive snort and remarked, "You can't simply shuffle money around without the board's approval." I stared him straight in the eyes and declared, "There is no trust board." Last year, Henry took the step to dissolve it. You overlooked the details in the fine print. Candace stepped forward, her long nails delicately grazing the papers as her practiced smile illuminated her face. "There's no way this is binding," she declared confidently. At that moment, I presented her with the final document, the notarized copy adorned with Alan's signature and date stamp. She stood still. I stepped back deliberately and stated, "This isn't up for discussion. You have a new notification. This morning, it's clear that you hold no legal claim to any of it." Not a single person stirred. Silence enveloped the room. The room had never felt so still, a rare moment of silence enveloping me as I stood there for the first time in years. I started to walk away, then stopped at the door and remarked, "Next time you wish to talk about my future, you'll need to schedule an appointment." I quietly closed the door, refrained from making a scene, and held back my tears. I turned my back and walked away, leaving them there in the house that Henry and I had invested in, suffocating on the illusion of control they believed they possessed. The following morning, I found myself in the kitchen, brewing coffee as the familiar old drip machine sputtered away, signaling that it was nearing completion. The tension was palpable. Even before I glanced at my phone, Blake's 5 missed calls, Candace's 3, and Trevor's single attempt. Of course, he chose the moment the storm hit to reach out. I tuned them out completely, settling into my seat at the table with my mug in hand, observing the steam swirl upward and pondering whether they had managed to catch a full night's rest. A small part of me wished they hadn't. At approximately 9:12 a.m., Blake sent a message that conveyed confusion rather than aggression. "Can we have a conversation?" That revealed it all to me. They were coming apart at the seams. At noon, Alan reached out to inform me that Blake had attempted to access 2 accounts using his business laptop, and both attempts raised red flags in the system. I told Alan, "That's great, let him get to work." An hour later, Candace appeared at my front door uninvited, sporting oversized sunglasses as if I wouldn't see through the tinted plastic and lip filler. I chose not to invite her in. She stood on the porch, exuding an air of reluctance, as if she were about to share unwelcome news with a neighbor she despised. "Eleanor." Amidst the uncertainty, she began, her smile taut and her voice adopting that familiar tone she reserves for moments of pretense. "Stay calm and composed. What could possibly motivate Henry to act in secrecy, away from everyone's knowledge?" I locked eyes with her and said, "Perhaps he anticipated your actions in its presence." She recoiled as if I'd struck her. I included, "It's best for you to go. This constitutes trespassing." She attempted to deliver a subtle threat regarding lawyers, but I shut the door before she could complete her thought. Just 10 minutes later, Trevor picked up the phone. His voice was hushed, as if he wished to keep his words from reaching his wife's ears. "Mom, I had no idea about any of this. I assumed that trust was simply a given. I had no idea that Candace and Blake were vying for control. The guilt was palpable, perhaps intertwined with the anxiety of potential exclusion. I mentioned that you had every opportunity to ask me directly. You certainly did not. Your silence speaks volumes." He simply hung up without a word. That evening, I prepared a sumptuous dinner for myself. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans with a hint of lemon. I was tired of subsisting on leftovers, while others indulged in the fruits of my sacrifices. Just as I was pouring a glass of wine, the landline rang once more. This time, it was Ava, Blake, and Candace's 17-year-old daughter, the only one who ever met my gaze during family dinners. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. "Grandma, I'm not sure what's happening, but Mom and Dad are really stressed out. They mentioned that the funds have disappeared and the house is facing difficulties. How are you doing? That struck me more profoundly than anything else. I became more gentle. I'm doing well, darling. There was nothing wrong with your actions. After a moment of hesitation, she softly murmured, I miss Grandpa. This would have been something he despised. I took a deep breath and revealed the truth to her. That's why he took action before it fell apart. Once the call ended, I found myself sitting alone at the table, enveloped by silence, and I experienced an emotion I hadn't encountered since the funeral, neither grief nor rage, but pure clarity. Henry had anticipated this chaos, and now they were struggling without any support. Blake discovered that he no longer had access to the accounts he believed were rightfully his. Candace boasted to her yoga friends about the house, but she had no legal claim to it. Trevor was beginning to understand that silence was not synonymous with innocence. Ava, the sole beacon of compassion in that family, found herself caught in the crossfire. This was just the start of something greater. Individuals of their caliber never back down. They rush into action, they contort, they seek out gaps in the system. What they failed to grasp was that I wasn't just a sorrowful old woman seeking their validation. I had become the firewall. If they're looking to take me on, they'd better be ready for what's coming next. Just 2 days after I closed the door on Candace and sent that message in silence, Alan called once more, his tone compelling enough to make me take a seat before he even began to speak. He leaned in and said, "You won't want to miss this." And 1 hour. Eventually, I found myself seated opposite him in his office, the very spot where Henry and I would gather each April to sign documents and sip on burnt coffee from small, worn mugs. Without uttering a single word, he slid a folder across the desk. Upon opening it, I found myself puzzled at first. Simply a collection of bank statements, account transfers, and loan agreements, all bearing Blake's name. Alan finally revealed that he had used your husband's business line of credit as collateral, potentially $500,000 or even more, as new discoveries continue to emerge. He approved them as a partner, but that partnership ended with Henry's passing. This indicates that these were indeed fraudulent. My hands turned icy. I carefully sifted through the papers once more, taking my time to observe as dates and figures began to fall into place. Blake's new SUV from last year, the unexpected kitchen remodel, and the ski trip in Aspen that they mentioned was funded by friends. Everything revolved around funds that belonged to someone else, money that Blake had no legal claim to access. He did this while Henry was still unwell, I inquired, my voice softer than I intended. Alan gave a nod of agreement. Absolutely, we are confident in that. 2 weeks following Henry's initial surgery, the first transaction took place. I gazed at the numbers until they faded from view. What once seemed like numbers began to resemble betrayal, the kind that festers from within. Alan leaned in and said, "We can take legal action if you prefer, or we can simply allow the financial pressure to build and enjoy watching him squirm. The choice is yours." No response was given, not at this moment. I had to take a moment to reflect on it. I made my way home in silence, uninterrupted, and headed directly to Henry's study, which remained largely undisturbed. There, I retrieved the aged leather journal he had hidden behind the encyclopedias. In that space, he meticulously jotted down notes throughout tax season, and inevitably, on one of the final pages, his tidy, slanted handwriting revealed a checklist of items to verify. Blake's withdrawals raised some eyebrows. Inquire with Alan. He had to have known. He likely had his suspicions, but never had the opportunity to see it through to completion. Now it was my responsibility to accomplish what he was unable to. Once more, sleep eluded me that night. As I sat at the kitchen table, the documents lay before me like scattered puzzle pieces. and I couldn't help but gaze at the undeniable proof that my son, my own flesh and blood, had taken from us during our struggle with endless doctor visits and the harsh realities of chemo side effects. I felt the urge to scream, yet I held it back. I created a new folder, named it Firewood, and began jotting down notes. Which assets are available for sale? Which debts can I collect? Which investments could I put on hold that Blake might still have a connection to? The following morning, I reached out to Alan and advised him not to press charges just yet. Allow him to simmer in his own thoughts. I want him to be defeated before he feels fear. On that very day, I reached out to the estate accountant, a gentleman named Peter, whom I hadn't encountered since Henry's retirement celebration. I asked him directly, "Did you have any knowledge of this?" He acknowledged it without hesitation. "I had some reservations. Your name has finally made its appearance." I felt completely constrained. I said to him, "Well, at this moment, they are not. Begin the conversation." And he certainly did. For more than an hour, he shared details regarding questionable fund transfers, Crimson. There were flags he couldn't explore without authorization, and it seemed Blake had been accumulating debt, convinced that upon Henry's passing, he would inherit everything and could tidy up the mess later. It was more than mere greed. It was sheer arrogance. He never imagined I would be the one wielding the pen when everything came to rest. That evening, I reached out to Blake with just one message. Consider securing a lawyer, an accountant, and finding an affordable apartment. I haven't received a response. I simply didn't require one. The only thing more deafening than his silence was the realization that everything he believed was his was slipping right through my fingers. Just 3 days later, they welcomed me to the family barbecue as if nothing had occurred, as if we hadn't turned the family tree on its head and let all the decayed parts fall away. Despite every instinct urging me to stay home and let them indulge in their falsehoods, I chose to show up. Sometimes, silence doesn't equate to strength, revealing your identities. I adorned myself with the pearl earrings Henry gifted me for our 30th anniversary and brought along a bottle of red wine that I knew was beyond their reach. As I stepped into the backyard, it struck me as completely staged, utterly artificial. Plastic tablecloths, strained grins, and music playing at a volume that keeps genuine conversation at bay. Candace donned white as if she were on a mission to make a statement. Additionally, Blake stood at the grill, embodying the role of a provider, flipping burgers as if the world around him was not engulfed in flames. Trevor gave me an awkward nod, caught in a limbo between anger and relief. I didn't wait for long. I approached the picnic table confidently, placed the firewood folder down, and declared, "We need to talk, at this moment." Candace let out an exasperated sigh. Blake whispered a comment to himself, and Trevor grabbed a beer, attempting to sidestep any confrontation. I opened the folder and spread out the documents. Every detail, from the loan fraud to the forged partnership extension and the fund transfers, is under scrutiny. I turned to her slowly, locking eyes, and said, "Henry saw it. He simply lacked confidence in your ability to resolve it, introducing a brand new experience." She remained silent. Ava, perched silently by the fence, gazed at me with wide eyes, as if she were just beginning to uncover the fractures in all she had been taught to accept. I glanced at Blake and declared, "Today, you'll begin signing everything over. The cars, the interior furnishings, the commercial stock, the fragments of what you sought to ruin are not yours to relish." Blake tightened his jaw, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he exclaimed, "Are you really going to jeopardize the entire family over a few pieces of paper?" I leaned in a bit closer and said, "No, you crossed that line when you took from your father's grave." That silenced him. I turned and walked toward the back gate, catching a faint mutter, likely from Candace, saying, "You're bitter. That's everything you are." An embittered woman clinging to the past. I paused, refrained from turning back, and spoke just loud enough for all to hear. "No, I'm the one who funded this entire yard, and I've made the decision that you're no longer welcome here." As I stepped through the gate, I chose not to glance back. Upon arriving home, I poured a glass of that exquisite wine and settled onto the porch, observing the sun dip below the trees, contemplating the paradox of experiencing both grief and strength simultaneously. I may not have felt joy, but I embraced my freedom. And it turns out, freedom, our tastes are far superior to fake smiles and ill-gotten gains. On the following Monday, I met with the real estate attorney and provided him with the list of properties that Henry and I still legally owned. The picturesque lake house Blake showcased on Instagram, the chic downtown condo Trevor had been discreetly leasing for cash under the radar, and even the SUV that Candace drove Ava to school in, proudly referring to it as a gift from Blake's dedication and effort. The lease bore my husband's signature, and now it is legally mine. I executed the sell orders methodically, without a moment's pause or fanfare, just precise, detached signatures that resembled the act of excising tumors from a family that had long ceased to thrive. The attorney inquired whether I preferred to inform them directly or allow the documents to convey the message on their own. I remarked that I wasn't included in the room when they believed they were splitting the kingdom. I refused to provide them a platform when it's clearly falling apart. By Friday, Blake's business account was completely emptied of illicit equity. Candace faced a setback when her credit cards were declined at a boutique in Westport. Trevor called, his voice breathless, inquiring whether the building manager was truly serious about ending his lease. "Absolutely," I stated, "and the next occupant will contribute rent just like everyone else." Candace, naturally, made quite the scene as she went down. She arrived once more, this time flushed and hollering at my doorstep like a banshee in high-end heels, insisting on answers, threatening to reveal me for elder abuse. Even though I stood there with superior posture, stronger legal standing, and honestly, more radiant skin than she had, despite all her cosmetic enhancements, I chose not to open the door. I remained silent. I stood silently behind the window, the blinds slightly ajar, observing her unravel until she finally surrendered and stormed away. The following morning, I arranged for a locksmith to replace the locks at the cabin. The following day, the SUV was discreetly retrieved from Blake's driveway during brunch, with his neighbors observing from their hidden spots behind the hedges. This wasn't about seeking revenge. I was taking action to reclaim what belonged to me, what Henry and I constructed piece by piece, while the others merely observed from the sidelines, anticipating their turn at the inheritance feast. Ava sent me a message that evening. "Dad is starting to lose his grip. There's a conversation happening about the possibility of moving in with Aunt Brenda. Will this last forever?" After a moment of contemplation, I finally crafted my response. Decisions leave a lasting impact. Consequences are inevitable. She remained silent, yet I noticed her fingers dancing over the keyboard, pausing intermittently. There were moments when it seemed she had more to express. I got it. She found herself caught in the crossfire between those who nurtured her and the reality they were desperate to keep hidden. That night, I experienced the most restful sleep I had enjoyed in months. A serene stillness enveloped me, a profound calm that penetrated my very being, cutting through the chaos like a breath of fresh air. Upon waking, I discovered a new email from the estate's financial advisor, confirming that all significant assets had been successfully reclaimed, liquidated, or reassigned. The message concluded with a single sentence that I found myself unable to stop revisiting. "You have complete control now." For the first time since Henry's passing, I found myself truly believing it. As I savored my morning toast, the doorbell chimed unexpectedly. Before I could make my way to the front window for a glimpse, a white envelope slipped silently beneath the door. Only my name scrawled in unsteady handwriting with no return address in sight. Initially, I considered that it could be from Ava, perhaps a handwritten note she preferred not to send via text. However, as I opened it, what tumbled out left me utterly stunned. An unsigned psychiatric recommendation form, boldly highlighted in aggressive red around the phrase, "Capacity Evaluation Recommended." It was clear to me right away. After years of reviewing Henry's legal briefs, I could easily spot a setup when it presented itself. It didn't take me long to figure out who was behind the attempt to file paperwork challenging my control of the estate, alleging that I was mentally unfit. I grasped the page firmly, and instead of fear, I felt a chilling, smoldering indignation, as if they had finally exhausted their bravery and were now clinging to cowardice. That afternoon, I made my way to Alan's office and placed the envelope on his desk, silent and purposeful. He skimmed through it, his eyebrows raising gradually, and remarked, "They really chose this path?" "That's daring." I gave a single nod and replied, "Trace it." I'm seeking clarity on who initiated the evaluation, the author behind it, and the individual responsible for the unauthorized access. 2 days later, Alan returned my call, his voice cutting through the silence like never before. Candace was the one. She reached out to a notary who had a debt of gratitude and made her attempt. We have emails to support the backdating of the file. One of the assistants willingly turned it over. It seems she wasn't too fond of being asked to engage in illegal activities on a Sunday morning. I instructed them to file charges. He stated, "Already in motion." As they loaded groceries into the back of a borrowed sedan that evening, a county sheriff's vehicle rolled into Blake's driveway. The neighbors flocked out eagerly, drawn in like moths to a flame. Candace unleashed a torrent of screams, shouts, and sobs, as if she had practiced this moment countless times. Yet it did nothing to prevent them from cuffing her on the sidewalk and reading her the charges: counterfeiting, deception, and efforts to manipulate the judicial process. Blake attempted to step in, but the deputy swiftly halted him with a firm hand on his chest. Ava filled me in on what happened later, even though I wasn't there to witness it myself. Her words slipped out softly, as if she carried a secret burden about their existence. Ava whispered that she attempted to blame you, but no one bought it, not even Dad. I mentioned to Ava that not everyone does. Pause. They decay internally until only sound remains. She fell silent after that, yet I could still hear her breathing on the line. For the first time, it felt as though someone in that house had glimpsed beyond the curtain. That evening, I poured myself a drink, opened the well-worn photo album that Henry would often browse when he longed for the boys, and gazed at their cherubic faces. It wasn't out of longing, but rather a necessary reminder of the love I once held for them. Your actions aren't driven by hatred, like mine were. You take action because you are the sole guardian of the sacrifices made to create it all. And if safeguarding that legacy requires putting one of them behind bars, then so be it. Candace had wagered it all on the belief that I would back down, that I would succumb to feelings of embarrassment, weakness, or the notion that I was too old to engage in the battle. She was unaware that my fear vanished the moment they instructed me to sit silently like a shadow in a space I had paid for. No more playing nice. This time, I was determined to see it through to the end. The courthouse hearing for Candace's arraignment was swift and harsh, mirroring the destruction she attempted to inflict, and I chose not to attend. Afterward, Alan reached out with a succinct message that conveyed everything in just 3 words. She accepted an offer. Details were unnecessary for me. I was certain that Candace would never take the chance of going to trial, especially with digital records linked to her personal email and the witness statements from the notary's assistant, who provided a sworn deposition in return for immunity. The plea bargain resulted in no jail time, yet it came with a lasting record and a hefty fine that threatened to shake their financial stability in the final months ahead. After that moment, Blake fell silent, offering no defense for her actions and not even a hint of a threat towards me. It's that profound silence, the unmistakable signal that someone has come to terms with the fact that the solid ground they once stood on has vanished. The following week, I found myself changing direction, driven not by revenge, but by necessity. Taxes needed to be filed, property closures had to be finalized, and above all, crucial decisions awaited regarding the implications of this entire struggle now that the dust had settled. I wasn't about to cling to every asset as if I were a dragon guarding its treasure. The objective was never that. I simply sought to safeguard what was rightfully mine, along with the foundation that Henry and I established from decay. I reached out to Peter, the estate accountant, and instructed him to transfer ownership of the smaller house just outside of town, the one featuring the charming porch swing and yellow shutters that Henry often said brought back memories of his grandma's home, into Ava's name. She never requested it. It took her by surprise. She stood out in that entire family, never attempting to manipulate me, never turning away when challenges arose. I wanted her to possess something that remained untouchable and unbreakable. Her tears flowed as I shared the news. Not the kind that feels forced, but rather gentle and surprising, as if it released something within her that she had been clinging to for too long. "I don't deserve this," she remarked. I said to her, "You do, because you didn't. Imagine." That week, I began collaborating with a nonprofit consultant to establish the Henry Whitmore Second Chance Fund, a grant initiative aimed at supporting widowed women over 60 who have been overlooked, excluded from financial decisions, or left with nothing. Following the loss of their husbands, I had no desire for a plaque or a ceremony. I was seeking something that would endure beyond the hurt. Before the website even went live, the first application arrived. A handwritten letter from a woman in Kentucky whose children had drained her bank account just a day after the funeral. I gave my approval in just 2 hours. One evening, as I was sifting through some paperwork, I stumbled upon an old note that Henry had hastily written on a dry cleaning receipt tucked away between the pages of his retirement binder. "Ensure that Eleanor is aware she accomplished everything." I simply stood next to her. I held back my tears. I gently folded it and tucked it away in the top drawer of his desk, alongside the original will, the keys, and now a sense of tranquility. By Friday, I successfully closed the final joint account associated with Blake's fraudulent LLC, donated the leftover inventory to a local business incubator, and dispatched an official cease and desist to the last law firm foolish enough to entertain his calls. The reconstruction was understated. It lacked enjoyment, yet it belonged to me, to Henry and me, unburdened now by the avaricious specters of those who shared his lineage but lacked his integrity. As I sat on my front porch, savoring my coffee while contractors diligently replaced the long-neglected, rotting fence panels, a revelation washed over me. I was no longer merely surviving. I was rising from the ashes, and I was doing it on my own terms. As I stood once more before that long, polished table, the very one where I had been instructed to sit quietly just weeks prior, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I'd taken and the stark contrast of their decline and defeat. A twinge of guilt lingered within me. Blake personally crafted the invitation, presenting it as a laid-back gathering. It feels like a trivial attempt to mend things, as if we could simply reboot our connections and smooth over the cracks with burgers and obligatory apologies. My intention wasn't to seek forgiveness from anyone. I attended because there are moments when those who attempt to diminish you must witness you standing tall, no longer seeking approval to take up space. Candace was absent. As part of her agreement with the state, she was required to keep her distance from me for a minimum of 6 months. Trevor lingered in the background, clearly wanting to speak up but unsure of how to begin. Ava sat beside me, her hands neatly folded in her lap, exuding a calm and watchful demeanor, as if she had finally mastered the art of being unyielding in a haze of uncertainty. Blake positioned himself at the head of the table, as if it remained his domain, his enduring legacy. Yet he appeared diminished, more fragile, as if the weight of his own narrative had finally taken its toll on him. He opened with a rehearsed line about how families navigate storms and cope in their own ways, but I found his script unappealing. I placed my glass down, surveyed the room, and declared, "This isn't a storm. It's the result of actions taken. Each and every one of you contributed to it." The silence was palpable. No one made a move for their water. Everyone remained perfectly still. Blake opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself or offer yet another excuse, but I interrupted him with a raised hand and said, "You told me I was merely the widow, that I should remain silent. Yet I made my voice heard when I created this family. I made my voice heard when I nurtured it, and I certainly won't hold back now that I've reclaimed it." I took a moment to let that sink in, then I continued. This table, this room, I possess them in every sense, legally, emotionally, structurally. Remember, you are our guests here. I rose without awaiting a reply, and as I made my way to the door, I glanced back one final time and stated, "You don't have to like me. I've reached a point where I refuse to diminish myself any longer, so you can feel more significant." I walked away, not out of anger, but because I had reached my conclusion. The sky outside was crisp and clear, the sort of light Henry always claimed was ideal for tending to the yard. As I settled into my car, there was no sense of victory, no smugness, and certainly no pride. I felt at ease. I battled the flames and emerged on the other side. Now, I'm on a journey to rebuild, not because anyone else granted me the go-ahead, but because I decided it was time for me to do so. And that, more than any act of revenge, inheritance, or title, was the victory I never imagined I would achieve, but truly deserved. That's it for today's story. If you found it moving, don't forget to share the video with your friends and family. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.